We, I mean myself. Okay, so let's see what we got with exemptions. Here we go. Exemptions. Now, you know one thing. Filing status often is relying upon whether you have an exemption, because the word exemption is also going to include dependents. The word can be used either way, exemptions or dependents. So now one thing you know for sure is that there is a relationship to the concept of, is a person a dependent, and that may influence whether you can do head of household or qualifying widow or joint return, etc. So there's an interplay between your filing status and if somebody's a dependent. There's also the following. When it comes to your status, you get a certain standard deduction from adjusted gross income. If your itemized deductions don't go above the standard deduction, you at least get that as a deduction from adjusted gross income. The better statuses give you a higher standard deduction. In addition to which, if a person is a dependent of yours, an exemption, that also reduces your adjusted gross income. So if I asked you the question, is that a reduction for or from adjusted gross income a dependent, you would all say it is a deduction. That's right. That's what you all say. And then you all fail. No. You would say from or for. If the dependent deduction is reducing adjusted gross income, is that for or from? From. So that's page 2. That's the other way to look at it. It's page 2. The radio announcer Paul Harvey would say page 2. That's what, if you know who he was. All right, so let's see a little bit about this area of tax law. Basically, there are two types. There's a personal exemption, and then there's an exemption for dependents. Personal means you. You get one. Everybody gets one. The question is, can you use yours? Because if you're a dependent of somebody else, yes, you are your own exemption, you're a personal exemption, but if you're already a dependent on someone else's return, you can't claim yourself. That makes sense. Each person is worth a certain amount of a deduction from adjusted gross income, and somebody gets it. Either you get it, or somebody who you are a dependent of, they'll get it, like your parents. Most people in school, here in this classroom, if they're being even if they don't live at home, but they are basically domiciled at home, meaning you haven't emancipated yourself, and most people haven't. Emancipation is a legal term for divorcing yourself of your parents from legal responsibilities, and you have to go through a process within each state to do that. So most of you haven't done that. So in your case, you're still, while you're in school up till age 24, you're still a dependent to your parents. They claim you, and even if they don't claim you, you're still a dependent of them. So you can't take your own personal exemption. So if someone can, watch the language in the regs. It says the following. If someone can claim you, even if they don't, you still can't take yourself. That's important. So encourage your parents to take you as a dependent if you are a dependent. And most of you are. So there are two types, personal, because everybody gets one, and then the people you take care of, so to speak, are dependent. So the personal exemption is yourself. And there you see, unless you can be claimed as a dependent by somebody else. There you see the exception. And notice the wording I put there. If another taxpayer is entitled to claim you as a dependent, you cannot take yourself as an exemption. So even if they don't. That's like, I needed to highlight that. You know, this part of when I get into these parts of the course, I don't like it any better than you. Because it's detail. And it's not unimportant, it's very important, but it's not as fun as some of the other things we'll do. So we'll move further. I'll leave the detail for you to read about. Exemption for dependents. You are allowed one exemption for yourself unless you can be claimed by somebody else, as we already learned. And then you can get a dependence deduction for people that you're basically taking care of. That's the idea. You're taking care of the people. The theory Now, the theory is one thing. You're taking care of these people. The problem is it's written in language in the code, so you have to follow the law. It's not just as simple as, well, I am taking care of them. There could be there's other qualifying tests that we have to go through. There's two types. This is important. So I'm not going to get into every nuance of detail, but here's the important part to get out of this class and to get out of how you read the chapter. There are two different types of dependents. One is a qualifying child. They have one set of rules. Qualifying child has one set of rules. A qualifying relative, which should be read the following. All the tax publications say qualifying relative is the second type, but it's not true because one category in there is someone who's not even related to you, but happens to be a freeloader in your household. That's the word I use. You may have a roommate that you think is a qualifying relative or dependent because they don't do anything, they don't clean, they don't help around the apartment you're renting with, and that roommate to you may be a liability because they don't do stuff with you to help you out. That's not a dependent necessarily because you're not paying for their support, but maybe you are. Maybe you are. So qualifying relative could be an asterisk there, that even if the person's not related to you, they may qualify under this qualifying relative category. What's the difference? The main difference is the following. Qualifying child is like it says. It's a child. It's a relative of yours in a lineal descendants, including adopted children, stepchildren, as I said, even children of divorce, of your divorce, that is. And then it meets certain tests. How long they lived in your household, we'll see some of these. So that's what the qualifying child means. And it's up to a certain age. We already touched upon it, but let me give you the details. It's up to age, including age 17. Includes age 17. Until your 18th birthday, you are potentially a qualifying child on somebody's tax return. That means some deduction from adjusted gross income, as long as their income's not too high. However, once you go above 18, things change. And like I said, except if you're what? In college, full-time. What's full-time mean? 12 credits and up. How many semesters? In 1 year. How many semesters in 1 year? You think 2, right? That's great. But the answer is only 1. 1 semester in a year, and you're age 20 or 21, all the way up until age 24. Up until age 24. So as long as you're in school, 1 semester full-time, or you at least take 12 credits during the year, doesn't have to be in 1 semester, you at least take what would be the equivalent of 1 full-time semester, you got it. You're a qualifying dependent, but not child. Yes, still child. That's the exception. Qualifying child goes up to age 17, including 17, but if you're in school up until age 24, you're still a qualifying child, and you have to meet the qualifying child rules in order to be claimed as a dependent by the person taking care of you. Doesn't have to be a parent. Well, I guess it does, because they have to have that relationship. So what happens if you don't have that relationship and someone is taking care of you? Then it could be the qualifying relative. If you're not in school and you're 18 and above, you could be still a qualifying relative. And as I said before, if you're not even related to a person taking care of you, if they meet the definition of qualifying relative, you're a dependent of them. And don't forget, if I give you a question, you are unemployed and you're 35 years old and you're an alcoholic and a gambler and a bunch of other addictive personalities, and and I'm taking care of you. Phew. Can't even imagine. I'm taking care of you and you're living in my household. Are you a dependent to me? Can I claim you? And if you look at the facts, you'll probably say, oh, yeah, you can. And you're probably right. Then the big question will be, can the person file their own tax return and take a dependency deduction for themselves? And the answer is no, because they're already being claimed. They lose their personal exemption because they're being claimed by somebody else. All right, you're getting the picture. You're getting the idea. That's the idea. Get the idea. All right. This is just, again, qualifying the basics of these dependency deductions. You have to have a dependent taxpayer test. That means, are they a dependent of yours? Sometimes there's going to be an income test. How much income did they make? Sometimes there won't be an income test. For example, qualifying child, there's no income test. But for a qualifying relative, if they make a certain amount of income, too much income, and they're not a dependent of yours. Where do they live? Some of them have that test. How much support did you provide for them? Notice also that they have to be a citizen or a resident of the country. They have to live here. They don't have to be a U.S. citizen in this terms of green card or U.S. citizenship, but they have to be a resident here, which means they're here for, say, it's a big test, it's a lot of detail, but let's say 365 days in a year. That definitely will meet the test if they're here for a whole year, that they're a resident. The second one is the one I want to concentrate on. Again, I try not to concentrate on too many of the details of this stuff and show you the secondary sources of how to use them, these matrices. But I want to point out that when you are a dependent of somebody, let's say I'll not pick on anybody in particular, but let's say somebody in this classroom is age 21. And they're a full-time student. But last year they got married. Their parents are still taking care of them. Now you got a problem. Once you're married, you have to meet certain tests while you're married in order to be able to be claimed by the parent taking care of you or the person taking care of you. So there's an exception. So that's what the joint return test here means in item number 2. Is if you're filing a joint return, most likely you're not going to be able to be claimed by anybody else as a dependent unless you meet certain tests. So, as I said, the devil's in the detail. You'll have to look at that. Let's take a look at a little bit more just to get our feet wet even further. Overview of the rules. You cannot claim any dependent if you or your spouse, if filing jointly, could be claimed as a dependent by another taxpayer. Once again, you cannot claim any dependents if you or your spouse, if filing jointly, could be claimed. You cannot claim any dependents if you or your spouse, if filing, could be claimed as a dependent. Okay, yeah. That's the reverse of what I just said. Same idea. You are filing jointly, and you could be claimed by someone else as a dependent, so you can't claim any dependents. You cannot claim a married person who files a joint tax return. These are important exceptions to dependency rules. Notice bullet 2. You cannot claim a married person who files a joint return as a dependent unless that joint return is only to claim a refund and there would be no tax liability. So that's the exception to the exception again. All right. Hopefully these little secondary sources help. The last bullet is a summary of what we've said, that he can't claim anybody unless the person is a qualifying child or qualifying relative as it's defined. And then the good news is, here's a matrix that really helps. This helps break it down. I'm not saying that this gives you every answer every time, because you may have to go and find out what does it mean in certain language here. Let's take a look. For example, under test to be a qualifying relative. The test to be a qualifying relative. Let's go down to item 2. The person either must be related to you in one of the ways listed under the IRS relationship test. There you see the or must live with you all year as a member of your household. Okay, so now you see that what I was telling you is true. They don't have to be related. Some freeloader, but they got to live with you the whole year. That's maybe different, and it is different, than other relatives. They don't have to live with you the whole year. Item 4, you must provide more than half of the person's total support. So we didn't talk about this yet, but look at that. You must provide more than half of the person's total support. That's true in both qualifying child and qualifying relative. It's true for both. So now you're going to want to know, when you are presented with issues or facts, you're going to know what kinds of expenses constitute support. You're going to want to know what that means. And I can't tell you, because every time this comes up, I have to look myself. The obvious situation is parents come in to do their tax return. They have 2 children living at home. One's age 11, one's age 6. They go to school. They live there all year. They don't work, the kids. Neither one of the kids won the lottery or is a model making a fortune of money. End of discussion. They're going to qualify. I don't go any further. I don't go to the detail. But you can begin to see that if circumstances change, new things come into place, then you got to get into those details. And then the little notations here are on the next slide in case you're looking at the matrix. Here's the bullets. Exception for adopted children. Exception. This week we should call our lectures the Week of Exceptions, because that's what I've been showing you, the Week of Exceptions. All right. Do you love it? We're going to move on. What we're going to do now is we're going to move on to Chapter 5. But before the class ends, we'll play a little Kahoot on just a couple questions on exemptions and filing status. So we'll stop here a second.